So what comes after burnout? Like once you've burned out and you thought about, okay, I'm going to return or I'm going to restart. What happens during that moment? That's the conversation I want to have today because we talk a lot about hitting burnout, right? How to avoid burnout, what to do when burnout happens. But after the burnout, like how do you recover from that? I don't know if, especially in the language learning space, we talk about that enough, right? You rest, you step back, you say you'll come back when you're ready, when you're motivated enough, when you're confident enough. And then maybe you do. But then you don't even realize what like ready feels like, what motivation, like where's the motivation? I'm still waiting for it. It's still not here yet. Or, I'm not there yet. I still have to wait a little bit longer until XYZ happens. Don't know what that is. And then that in between space where like you don't feel ready yet to do stuff, you don't really trust that you can do the thing, or you are studying, like you have gotten back into it, but you're not doing the things that you know you should be doing, right? You're kind of in that what I like to call productive procrastination space. Yeah, I I know that space very well. Because after burnout, it's not really about like motivation, although motivation is a key part of it. It's also about trust. Like when you have burned out, it's because you did something to where you've drained all of your energy and completely emptied all of it. Like there's nothing left. You didn't replenish and add to it. You just kept taking and taking and taking, and it's gone. And so now there is often, at least for myself, there's a part of me when this happens that I go, well, what if it happens again? What if I burn out again? What if I, can't get past this point? But the reality is the only way to get past that point is to do the work, to do the thing, to study, to practice. But you have to do it differently. I think when I get caught up in that cycle of burning out, I go, I need to make a better high achieving plan. My plan was not good enough. But the reality is, I was shooting for this when I should have been here. I was trying for high level, let's try to do all the things. And instead, I needed to go for what's going to help me to make progress and is feasible and doable for me right now and build up from there. And that's why I talk about things like levels of expectations all the time, because it is such an important part of my process and how I support language learners, because it gives me the space to still set those high achieving expectations as a perfectionist, as an overachiever. But then when reality sets in that one day or that one week, I can go, well, that's why you have your level of good. That's why you set that lower expectation, so that you can at least check it off and say you did something and you know it's going to help you to make progress. Because otherwise, then the motivation tanks even more because I didn't do what I set out to do. And I'm like, see, in another video, I talked about kind of building the case for your confidence, showing yourself that you can do it by building the case with evidence, doing it to show yourself, oh, I can actually learn languages. I can actually make progress. Because otherwise it feels like I thought I could, but it's not happening. And the way to end that is, like I said, you got to build the case. You got to take action. You got to do it. So sometimes when you take a break or, you've burned out, you're taking that little mental break away from language learning. At least for me, I've gotten to a point where sometimes I'm like, okay, so when do I come back? Like how do I do that? And it talks a little bit about returning in the previous episode. And also I talk about it a few times on my channel as well, that like you feel like you have to return on the optimal day. And again, this is for the perfectionist people here. So if I'm saying these things and you're like, no, I've never thought about that before, it's probably not the part of the message for you. But I know for myself, I'm like, well, it has to be a Monday. Like I got to start fresh at the beginning of the week, or, it has to be the start of a month or the start of the new year. It's July and I messed up. Well, I guess I have to wait all the way until January to start over again. But then on the other hand, I say to myself, like, well, now you've rested too long. Now you've waited too long. And how are you going to get back into it, And so when you get back into it, you're like, I want to study, but I don't even know where to start. Like, what do I do? How do I jump back into it? And there's lots of different ways to do it. But I know for myself, it's like, I don't want to overdo it again. So when I think about, opening up the app, my default is do 3 lessons. But I'm like, you did 3 lessons every day and look what happens. So again, it's about being able to set boundaries and guidelines and expectations that match where you are, but that match and honor where you are. Because it's not just matching where you are, but it's also about not shaming yourself into doing more than you can, because otherwise you have this voice in the back of your mind that's like, don't mess it up. You got to do better this time. And like, then that's a lot of pressure that we're putting on ourselves. And it's like, it's almost like the worst kind of stuck that we can feel in our language studies, because now we're trying to avoid that. And in the process, we're probably avoiding a lot of other things that we could be doing, that we, a lot of opportunities that we're saying no to because of that fear and that pressure to do better, right? So like, I think about the times when I was at my lowest, where I like kind of wanted to quit learning languages, and I would look through my notes. Like, I remember especially after Japanese 3, when I had to kind of finish on my own, essentially, because I didn't have teachers. My friends were still in Japanese class, but I couldn't do it because I was in my first year of grad school. My first year of grad school, but technically my fourth year of undergrad. It was a 5-year program sort of thing. And I remember looking at the essays that I wrote, even just a year later, and just going, man, you were so good at this. What happened to you? Like, that's how I would talk to myself. And I hated that I did that, but I did. And, it was like, oh, well, you're not going to get there anymore. You're not going to be that good. But there were very specific circumstances that got me to where I was then. And a lot of it was heavy, concentrated practice. Class was 2 hours, let's say. After class, 3-ish hours on a generous day, talking more Japanese with friends. Then the content I watched was in Japanese. The things that I read were in Japanese a lot of the times. So I would say half of my day texting in Japanese, everything. So like, let's say a third to a half of my day for 3 years straight, including the summers, was in Japanese. And I went from a third to half of my day in Japanese to about 1/4 of my day in Japanese on a generous day, because everything shifted for me. And I was expecting the same amount of progress and maintenance as the person I was when I was living half a life in Japanese. And it was really silly of me to expect that of myself, because it's impossible to have that same kind of experience and progress when I wasn't living the same life. Like, I just didn't have all of those other circumstances. And so even when I would rest, I would feel guilty. Like, when I would say, okay, I understand that replenishing energy is important and we need to do that, but then I would do it and I would feel guilty. Or I would do things that I realized were studying or were helping me to make progress, but because it didn't feel like progress, I would feel guilty about that. Like, every time I would play a video game, I'm like, well, your friends are taking a 2-hour class and you're over here playing a video game. That's not really studying. Like, you need to open up a notebook and pull out some vocabulary and then turn those into sentences and then get those sentences correct. Like, you need to be formally studying in the process. I like, there's some merit to that. It can be helpful, but I think what's the word I'm looking for? Like, I needed to define for myself what studying was and what progress was. Kind of like in my series on my channel where I talk about redefining fluency. Like, I had to really figure out, well, what kind of progress am I expecting to see? Is gaming going to help me see that progress? And ultimately the answer was yes. And then I had to keep reminding myself of that to help chip away at that guilt and that shame, because I kept judging myself, right? And I think that's the part that people don't talk about with language burnout, because we get into this space and everyone's telling you, learn a language in 30 days, study for 3 hours every day. You're going to make progress. You're going to master the language and then travel to the country. That's a path that is not for everyone. 1, 2, is not feasible for everyone. Literally not what some people want in their language journey. But for some reason, we're all following the same path. Like, it never made sense to me, but I didn't know anything else. And when you don't know anything else, when you don't know what you don't know, how can you sort of figure yourself out of it? How can you find your way through it if you don't know that there's another option? If you only see this direction out of the forest, how will you know that actually you can take that left around the corner? You don't see it. You don't know that exists until you try or you see other examples of it. And that's kind of why I talk about, right? So you can't just plan your way out of a burnout. You can't just create a plan and then say, it's done, no more burnout. Like, you actually have to do something about it, but you can't do the same thing that you were doing, because that's the reason why you're here. That's the reason why you burned out, why you are now in a position where you want to restart instead of continue. You want to start from the beginning. And if you do that, most times, what I've seen from my own experience and from the people I work with, you end up doing it again and again and again, and then wondering why that's happening. So like, after burnout, I realized that the one thing I didn't need was another in-depth very specific, rigid plan. Like I needed a plan, but I first needed to reflect. And I think that's the part that's missing from a lot of people's language learning process, formally or informally. It's like what actually worked for you? What not work for you? Why did that work? Why did that not work? I needed to do that before I created the plan. And what I was doing every time I, went through that burnout cycle was I kept just making a new plan. Oh, this plan's going to work now and this plan's going to work now. But I wasn't really thinking about why the previous plans didn't work in order to make strategic decisions. And so it was like, what do they say? Like throwing spaghetti on a wall, like whatever it was. I was just playing. I was just pressing buttons and hoping that something happened, and it didn't. Or I guess it did, but I wasn't paying attention to what combo was getting the results that I wanted, And so I had to shift into thinking of my language learning as an experiment. I say all the time now, it's about collecting data. What is working? What is not working? Do more of what's working in your language studies, do less of what's not working. And in order to figure that out, you have to add in that reflection. That's why I have the whole cycle of strategic planning, the fluency practice, and then your progress reflection. You have to reflect on the progress, you get that clarity, and you plan. You actually do the work, practice. Like it's a cycle. It's a whole thing. And we talk about it all the time inside of Fluency Mastery Lab. But I needed to get clear about that. And then what were my levels of expectations? Like what is my good, better, and best for each language? So I knew that even at my level of good, the lowest level, it was still helping me to make progress in any of the languages that I was learning. It was going towards what I defined fluency to be. And so, for example, that might have been, especially at the start, coming back to my language studies, like 5 minutes of a podcast, reading just the first paragraph of the text in a textbook versus reading the entire thing. I just needed my brain to believe that I could do it. And the way that I got my brain to believe I could do it was giving it tasks that were small and simple to say, look, you did it again. Look at that. Congratulations. And then, I celebrate those and I write them down like in my wins tracker because especially in those stages, I really had to formally write them down to acknowledge them. Now it's a lot easier for me to acknowledge without having to write them down in a tracker, but it took time to get there. And I had to literally write down every win, everything I consider to be a win in my language studies. So I can look back and go, look, you were talking bad about yourself. You said you couldn't do the thing, but you got 11 entries in here in 2 days. So what are you talking about? What are you even talking about, Bront'e? Like, doesn't make sense. And so the first few days when we're coming back and we're returning, it's going to be shaky. It's going to be weird and awkward, or you're going to feel like you're not doing enough. But it's not about going from 0 to 100. It's about momentum and consistency. Consistency isn't every day. I say it all the time. I always compare it to like watering a plant. That some plants need a little bit of water infrequently, like once a week even, and some plants need a lot of water every single day. This is how consistency works in our language studies, that we might need different things throughout the week. Some days that we purposely skip, we give ourselves those days of, I'm not expecting myself to do anything these days. Some days we say, well, here's our bare minimum of what we're going to do. And we know if we do this, it's going to help us to make progress. And the more that you do that, the more that you, again, build that case for you can do it. But also you start to see patterns in what's working and what's not working. And then you can adjust accordingly. Like, hey, every time I open up a podcast, I'm always procrastinating. Or it takes me like 15 minutes to even start a podcast episode. Well, why is that? And these are also the questions that I tend to ask in coaching sessions to help other people figure out the whys behind what we're doing or avoiding. Because if we can understand why, then we can make better decisions in our language studies. And this might feel like way too much for what we're trying to do. We're just learning languages. Just pick up a textbook and do it. But this is lifetime. Even when you learn a language and you get to the point where you're using it regularly in your life, you have to then maintain that skill. Because when you don't use it, you're going to lose it. And especially for those of us who are learning multiple languages, then you have to figure out, well, how am I going to maintain 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 languages at the same time? It does take strategy. You may not be a nerd like me figuring it all out and mapping it out in a very strategic plan, but I always recommend a schedule, whether you need something more rigid or something more flexible. And I have videos on like schedule creation and like what to do before planning. So if you want a deep dive into that, absolutely go to my channel to check it out. But I think the biggest piece of evidence that you get from easing yourself back into the process is that you realize you remember a little bit more than you thought you did. You feel like you've forgotten everything and you realize, oh, okay, I didn't forget everything. Like maybe I forgot how to conjugate in the past tense or like the differences between the two past tense in Spanish. But I recognize when it's past tense versus present tense, and I know the AR, ER, IR verbs. Like I actually remember that. And then you get to build off of that. So we don't really rebuild our trust and our confidence and our motivation through promises, making promises to ourselves. Because if you've ever made a New Year's resolution, you know that the promise that you make to yourself is not one you're going to keep if you don't actually do anything. It's built on proof, and proof takes action. But I will say that a lot of the guilt and the shame definitely comes from perfectionism, being a perfectionist. And I actually have a whole series on my channel about perfectionism. Because when I say that this is probably one of the three pillars of failure, or like one of the three pillars of I'm never going to make progress in the languages that I'm learning, whatever you want to call that. And perfectionism and trying to be perfect ends up leaving us feeling guilty. It makes you feel like the effort that you're taking doesn't count. And when we feel guilty, it doesn't make us do more. It doesn't make us consistent. It makes us scared to do anything. Now, spite can make you do a lot of stuff. Spite can make you get 7 degrees, but guilt doesn't usually have that same kind of push on us. It's not the same kind of motivator. Guilt often makes us retreat and do less, or it makes you burn out again because you feel like that's the only way to do it, is to go through the burnout cycle over and over and over and over again. So instead of asking myself, am I doing enough? I started to ask myself, is what I'm doing doable? That's literally one of the questions that I ask in coaching sessions when people are struggling to make that consistent progress and like create a plan, a schedule, or a routine that works for them. Is what you have planned doable for you? How can we make this doable for you? Because if it's not doable, if it's not fun, if you're not excited to do it, you're less likely to do it. And then how in the world are we going to be consistent? You know, we're not trying to add to our anxiety. We're trying to hold ourselves accountable to the thing that we said we're going to do. And so this means that we can show up in a way that maybe feels less than what we anticipated or what we hoped, but we know we're still going to be making progress, right? Some days it might mean just watching a video with some subtitles. That's your session. Some days it might be writing down the lyrics to the song, not doing any translation or sentence mining, vocab mining, just writing down the lyrics. Maybe not even the whole song. Maybe just write down the first verse. That's it. Tomorrow you do the chorus, then you do the second, the bridge. That's what you're doing, one bit at a time. Maybe it's just journaling a single sentence. It's not about catching up. I think a lot of the conversations that we'll have in our heads as well is that we need to catch up when we've fallen behind. You missed a day, you got to catch up. You missed 2 days, you got to do 2 days worth. You missed a week, you either have to do 7 days of work and break it up again, or you just need to give up for now and start over. And this is kind of, I don't know where in the process it happened, but this immediately made me think of like National Novel Writing Month. So NaNoWriMo, if you know anything about National Novel Writing Month, which I know has fallen in popularity for various reasons, but separate conversation. A lot of the pressure around that month of write a complete novel story in a month. It's like, you missed a day. You didn't do your 1,600 words. Okay, well, now you have to do, essentially like 3,300 words the next day. You missed the 3,300 words. Well, now you got to do like 4,900 words. Like you have to add the words that you missed for the next day. And I think we do that a lot with missed days, which is why for those of us who have that kind of mental pressure, I say build the missing days into your schedule. These are the 2 days that I'm missing, or I give myself 2 grace days automatically. Like I give myself 2 days, I don't have to do anything. Don't know what days those are going to be because my schedule changes all the time. Things change, but at least 2 days of the week or 3 days of the week, I know I don't have to do anything. No studying. I can have fun if I want to, if I have the time and the capacity, but also I can do absolutely nothing. And the plan that I've set is still going to help me to make progress. So I can just do nothing and it's fine. So basically what I learned from the many burnouts that I've had in my journey is that I couldn't build fluency in any language: Spanish, French, Japanese, Korean, Mandarin, Chinese, Russian, German, American Sign Language, Black American Sign Language, Tutnese, Italian. Like I can't build fluency in any of these languages by pushing myself to do more and pushing harder. I had to actually be gentle with myself. As someone who is naturally more strict with myself, I had to learn how to be less strict. Now, some people might need the reverse. You actually might need to be a little bit more tough on yourself, or you might need someone else to do that for you. I know a lot of the people who are at their best when it comes to consistency are the people in the lab who show up to declare what they're doing for the week so that we can hold them accountable for them. Like I have said many times where like it's hard for me to reward myself for a job well done, because if I want the reward, I'm just going to take the reward. Like if I want the thing, I'm just going to get the thing. But if someone else is holding me accountable, so in the case of our community post on Monday, someone else is declaring, here's what I'm going to be doing for the week. It's my job and it's our community's job to say, okay, did you do it? Did you not do it? Let us know. And that can be the missing piece without having to sign up for a class or a tutor. Or in addition to that, because sometimes it's like, okay, well, I did my homework, but I didn't actually do any other practice. And then you get into that mindset where you're kind of learning to the test. You're learning to do the homework, not learning to use the language. So if you're in that quiet space for burnout, right, you're right at the cusp of, I think I'm ready to start right now. I'm going to be the one to tell you, you're not lazy. You're actually healing. And sometimes the effects of burnout can last a year. So don't expect like a recovery in a couple months and then suddenly you're okay. It can happen. But sometimes that burnout, depending on the impact and the severity and all of those things, it can last years. I also want to encourage you to start small with the things that you're setting. Like what's the task that you can do that's small? What, again, maybe not the whole chapter, but part of the chapter, maybe one activity at a time per session, maybe the reading, but only reading the beginning part, maybe one lesson on that language app that you're using. My preference is Lingo Deer or Mango Languages. So maybe just one lesson instead of 5 lessons every time, because why are we doing that to ourselves? And every time we do that, it's building the case to demonstrate that you can do this, because you can. And it keeps it sustainable too, keeps us honest. And then we can actually improve our skills and then use the languages that we're learning, because that's the goal, is to use these languages.